Oh, yeah. Who's running a hot board?
Boom. That's how you do it.
Ain't no dead air when Corn runs a board. Ain't no dead air. All right, Mike Morgan with us. So we spent a good amount of time talking about SEC race here heading down the stretch, 3 weekends to go, and just talking about the Gamecocks. I mean, what do you think of the changes they've made? A roll of the dice by Mark Kingston to change things up, and so far you'd say so good, but they've got a 3-weekend stretch coming up that's really going to test them.
Yeah, I think it's in line with what modern-day lineups look like, which is you're willing to sacrifice some defense for offense. The analytical gods have said you'll give up a little in the fielding percentage to get more in the OPS. And I think that's clearly, what they did, and obviously hit the ball extremely well of late and in that Kentucky series, and should be able to do so on the road at Missouri as well.
Missouri, what's up with them? First of all, the park out there, I hear, is somewhat it's not very good.
It is 15 out of 14 in terms of the SEC. It is what it is. Look, I mean, any Missouri fan would tell you that. Their coaching staff would tell you that, and tell you that it's a challenge in recruiting. They had hoped for a while that somebody would cut a big fat check. Somebody say, I don't know, Max Scherzer, but nobody apparently has. So they've improved a lot of other things over there, and they do have some tradition. There are some good players that have come through that program, but facility-wise, in a conference full of cathedrals, it does not qualify.
Yeah. What kind of surface do they play on there?
Turf. Oh yeah, turf. I mean, it gets so cold there, it's almost impossible to keep grass growing. Tell you, I had one of my scariest moments ever, but just behind the microphone. There was a kid for Missouri, I believe, or it might have been the opponent. This is 6-7 years ago, and he is running in foul ground, first base side, full bore, and ran into the brick wall on the side. It's not a fence; it's a brick wall.
Ooh.
Unless they've changed it in the last couple of years. And, I mean, everybody was scared to death because he was not moving for a long time. Now, thankfully, he had all movement in his extremities eventually and turned out to be okay. But that's one of the scariest things I've ever seen in a baseball game. But, yeah, it's turf. The last time I checked, I hadn't been there in 4 years, I think, for a game, for a baseball game, that is. But yeah, look, it's not going to be an intimidating crowd.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. The atmosphere is not SEC like, but sometimes that becomes a challenge. You got to still manage to get up and get motivated, even though it's going to be different than what you're used to as a player.
Absolutely. Visiting with Mike Morgan on the Move. What do you think they will do when Tippett is healthy and ready to go? Do you think that they will put him right back in at shortstop because of his defensive prowess, knowing that he's not going to hit, but then you got to either go back to what you were doing before or just make a straight-up change? What do you think he'll do?
That's a great question. I mean, again, I lean toward what typically coaches lean toward today, and that is if a guy is serviceable at a position like shortstop, which we all know is extremely important, but if he's serviceable there and he's swinging a much better bat, today's day and age, they go offense. That didn't used to be that way. Mm-hmm. You would go with the light-hitting middle infielder if he was a vacuum cleaner over there. But I think from the major leagues on down, that has changed quite a bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, Kingston's kind of relying on their numbers saying when they score 6 or more, they win. So that's what he's aiming for. Yeah. Quick question about Clemson, Georgia Tech, since you're right there in Atlanta. You got Georgia Tech right downtown. Another kind of piddling season for Georgia Tech baseball. What do you know about them as they go into this series with Clemson?
I know the same thing about Georgia Tech that I know every year, which is they're a classic underachiever. And I know that sounds harsh, but they just are. They have everything at their disposal. A beautiful ballpark, which I know you've been to because you and I were there for a couple of regionals that Carolina was in. They've got Atlanta. I mean, Cobb County alone can field an All-American team.
Yeah.
You've got a reputable league in the ACC, and there was a time where Georgia Tech was going to some World Series, but it feels like forever since they've been able to break that seal again. So, they are not to the level of what Clemson is, and Clemson clearly is a better baseball team in 2024.
06, actually, Mike, was the last time Georgia Tech made a World Series. Is Danny Hall in a situation where they're just going to let him play out the string? I mean, he's won over 1,100 games there, but you're right. I mean, the program has been stagnant for a while, even though they made a regional a couple of years ago. I mean, how much longer do they stick with him?
It's a great question. I like Danny. I've actually met Danny and interviewed Danny. He's class personified, and he's kind of a throwback where when I first started doing Gamecock games in the SEC, there were a lot of coaches that had been there for a long time that weren't necessarily winning anymore, but I think the feeling upon high was, well, let's let him leave on his terms and not ours. That's kind of how I feel about Danny Hall at Georgia Tech. Like, unless the wheels completely come off, and they never do. I mean, they're always competitive to good. They're just not great. But I don't sense that there's a move to make a change there anytime soon.
Back to the SEC for a moment, sort of big picture, looking ahead to the NCAA tournament. D1 Baseball came out with its regional projections earlier this week, and they actually had Texas A&M as the number 1 overall national seed, ahead of Arkansas as the 2. Has A&M, in your mind, passed Arkansas, even though Arkansas still has a better record?
A&M's got the better offense. Arkansas's got the better pitching. So kind of take your pick, right? A&M right now is better at the plate. And if Arkansas – look, we always fall back into those cliches, pitching and defense wins in the baseball postseason. Well, yeah, they do, but you got to hit too. And this is not the most formidable Arkansas lineup that I've seen. So I think the people that are tabulating that up, that's my best guess as to why they lean that way. It's just A&M is more imposing offensively.
Over to the NFL draft for a minute. I'm curious your reflections this week on what the folks in Atlanta have been talking regarding Michael Penix, because you told us last week you didn't anticipate they would draft him with the number 8 overall selection. They did. Obviously, I think in terms of the first round, that may have been the biggest surprise. How has the city of Atlanta received their new quarterback?
To quote one of my friends who's an afternoon host on 680 The Fan in Atlanta, the Falcons are just not good at football. It makes absolutely no sense to spend $100 million on Kirk Cousins and then with one of the worst defenses in the league spend the number 8 pick on a backup quarterback. And that's what he's going to be for the next couple of years, is a backup quarterback. That doesn't add up at all. Atlanta was essentially the laughingstock of the draft. And most Falcon fans are still scratching their head on that one. Even if you love Michael Penix, then don't sign Kirk Cousins. You just don't do both. You're either building for now or you're building for later. You can't do both. And I think they panicked personally. I had heard from somebody who I trust at the NFL Network that he was hearing Atlanta was going to go quarterback. And I just kept saying that doesn't make any sense. That can't be true. Well, he was right. He was right. And I certainly didn't see that coming, and nor did anybody in Atlanta or anybody else covering the draft.
And the Hawks aren't very good at playing basketball. The Braves are pretty good at playing baseball on the West Coast. They did lose, I said Arizona earlier. It was actually Seattle. They lost
Seattle,
2 of 3 to Seattle, but now they go play the Dodgers. But what about, and Chris brought this up earlier, Strider being out, but I kind of feel like they've got arms, right? Or they can always go to Gwinnett and find an arm or two to come up and help fill that void to some degree. I know it's a big hole to fill.
They're not finding Spencer Strider in Gwinnett.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they've got arms. And I don't know if you were on the show when the injury first happened. I was talking about it with your crew there. But, look, they're going to win a lot of games, and I'll bet they win their 7th consecutive divisional title and go to another postseason without Spencer Strider. They're that good. But I don't know about making a deep run in the postseason without an ace. If Chris Sale can keep this up, that might change my opinion. And I think Max Fried got off to a rough start, but I still have a ton of confidence in him. But to lose Spencer Strider, a guy that led the league in wins and strikeouts a year ago, that's a massive, massive loss. And I don't think you make that up in a trade. You don't make that up in a call to the minor leagues. That is something that I'm afraid will be felt come October. I hope I'm wrong.
Let's talk a little football while we got you. SEC football right there in your backyard. News came out today. Kirby Smart, new contract or contract extension, now going to pay him $13 million. What are you hearing from Georgia fans there in your area? Is it like, oh, way to go, attaboy, he deserves every penny? Or is it like, wow, $13 million a year now, highest paid coach in college football? Who would have ever thought that?
Georgia fans would have given him $23 million a year.
No.
I mean, seriously, like, is there anybody with Saban out of this thing now? Is there anybody you would rather have?
Dabo?
Is there anybody that's
Dabo?
No, and that's not true. I don't think Clemson fans even believe that. They basically have it on autopilot. They recruit every year. They'll hit the portal when they need to. They dominate the league. If they lose more than one game in a season, it is an absolute newsflash. So, yeah, no, he's the top of the pyramid right now. He's absolute top of the pyramid.
Could you have foreseen that coming when, look, South Carolina wanted him first, and Georgia beat him to the punch. Would he have been this successful at South Carolina?
No. Nobody believes that. Kirby Smart doesn't believe that. No, it's a more difficult job. We know this. I mean, Georgia is a program that, quite frankly, is underachieved a bit, but they are what is the expression? Too big to fail. Remember that with the Banks years ago?
Yeah.
That's what Georgia football is. And I'm not saying the next guy is going to be as successful as Kirby, just like I'm not saying Kalen DeBoer is going to be as successful as the GOAT was, Nick Saban. He won't be. But both those programs are two of the best jobs in the sport. Nobody has ever said that about South Carolina.
Got to give, and you're right. But you look at Georgia. I read through their media guide last summer at Media Days. They had 75 support staff. I'm not talking about the assistant coaches and all that. I'm talking about all the analysts and everything else. 75 listed. And Gamecock fans won't want to hear this, but, I think you got to give Will Muschamp probably a lot of credit for how good that defense is. Will Muschamp is a defensive guru. He might not be a good head coach, but he can coach defense. I got to think he's got a lot to do with the play of that defense.
Oh, I'll give Will Muschamp his props. And look, I'll defend the hire. Will Muschamp, when he was hired at Florida, was the hottest thing going. He was going to be the head coach at Texas. Remember, they had a succession plan. And then Jeremy Foley of Florida said, "The heck with your succession plan. We're gonna poach him right now." And then they had one 11-win season there, and the rest of the time it didn't work out. They had quarterback issues, what have you. He had to clean up a lot of Urban's mess, if we're being honest about it. But he deserved another chance at a SEC caliber job. Went to South Carolina, came out hot those first 2 years, overachieved, and then it all went south. And quite honestly, that's the story of almost every coach to ever coach in Columbia. If you're fortunate, you start off hot. Lou had 2 good years out of the first 3, and then what happened? Down the toilet. Steve Spurrier had the best 4-year stretch in history, and what happened? It went south. Brad Scott won the first bowl game in school history. What happened? It went south. Joe Morrison. I mean, you know all these guys better than I do, Phil. You've been around longer than I have.
Yeah.
So,
I've made the point. I've made the point that only 3 times, and Shane Beamer fell right into it. Only 3 times since 1960 has a USC head coach had a winning record in his 3rd season at South Carolina.
Wow.
Like you said, started off hot, had a couple of good starts. Well, Lou Holtz had a winning record his 3rd season. I think it was, if my memory's right, it was Morrison, Holtz, and Muschamp, I think, had a winning record in his 3rd season. But like Shane Beamer, started off, nice, bowl win, went to a bowl his 2nd year, tough loss in the bowl game, and then this 3rd year, losing record. So, he's got a rebound. I want to ask you this real quick. We're down to about 2 minutes. So, odds makers have made Georgia a 10.5-point favorite over Clemson. What's been the reaction in your neck of the woods to that?
I don't know if anybody's looked at the line other than degenerate gamblers like yourself, Phil.
It's a talking point. It's a good talking point.
A talking point. No, honestly, that's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah.
But I don't think people are surprised. Look, I think it's a great matchup. I applaud both the schools opening up with that as opposed to cream puff schedules. And hopefully it'll be an entertaining game. But Georgia's going to be favored almost over anybody they play, home, neutral, and almost every road game in 2024. I'd have to look at their schedule to figure out if there's any chance there'll be a slight dog somewhere. But, on the surface, I know what you're saying. The number seems a little high. Clemson certainly has enough quality players coming back where if you're a Clemson fan, you'd like to think you got a good chance of winning, and you just might. But, Georgia's going to be the favorite to win everything. Carson Beck might be the number 1 pick in 2025. That's their quarterback. They lose Brock Bowers, but they got Oscar Delp, who's another pro at tight end.
Oh, yeah.
They got linemen all over the place. They got pros all over that defense. They've got running backs. Like they got a lot of good stuff coming back over there. So it's not surprising to me that the line would be around there.
Mike, glad we got your phone charged up and ready to go. Great stuff tonight. We appreciate it. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, fellas.
Thank
Appreciate
you, pal.
it, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Mike Morgan, expertly produced on Sports Talk.